Alrighty, it is March 22nd, and we're so thrilled to be joined by Mor Naaman, who is a professor of information science at Cornell Tech, where he also serves as the Associate Dean for Technical Programs. He runs a very cool group for multidisciplinary machine learning and qualitative science studying AI-mediated communication. And fun fact, he used to play professional basketball in Tel Aviv. So very wonderful character and excellent scholar and leader in this field that we're thrilled to be joined by today in the class. So thank you so much, Mor, for giving us your time, and we're excited to hear your talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and fun to be here with all of you, some people I know, some friends, and some people I will get to know, hopefully. So let me start. I want to talk about AI-mediated communication and start with a little origin story, perhaps, of where this came from, if my slides will cooperate. Here you go. So this was about 6 years ago with my then PhD student, Xiao. We were looking at online trust, and in particular, we were looking at the perceived trustworthiness of in the sharing economy. For example, here, we looked at how people evaluate host profiles based on what they write in the self-description on Airbnb. And Xiao had this idea one day. She came and said, what happened if what would happen to the evaluation if AI wrote these profiles? And it was back in 2017. It was kind of science fiction to think of AI that could reliably pass for human in writing coherent text, in particular in a specific domain. But we thought it was an interesting idea, so it was so interesting that we decided to even give it a name. We think about what we call it. It took, I think, weeks of maybe us, bouncing ideas back and forth of what we might call this phenomenon. And I still remember when Xiao burst through these doors behind me and said, I know, this is AI-mediated communication. So we landed on this term of AI-mediated communication I'll talk about today, which I think by now we all recognize that AI is increasingly capable as an agent in human-to-human exchanges, from making recommendations of what we should write, to modifying presentation, to creating the entire thing on our behalf, and asking about how it can impact our language, our social interactions, and our society in multiple ways. But maybe step back for a second and talk about the term again. Why did we call it AI-mediated communications? We were building on the idea of computer-mediated communication, right? This is the old school stuff. This is the decades-old academic research field where traditionally researchers and people looking at CMC assume that the sender will adapt to a channel to craft their message, but that the message, as they crafted it, will be transmitted to the receiver, which then gets to interpret the message. And when I say message, it could be a text message, it could be an email, but it could also be video, audio, anything that's transmitted in exchange via a computer channel. So this was old, but now increasingly we have AI-mediated communications, right? We have a participant in the channel, an AI agent that can suggest edits, modification, generate the communication, as I mentioned. So we called it AI-mediated communication. By now, and today, I've been giving this talk for quite some time now, but there's less and less need to explain what this means. The most popular example right now that all of us are seeing every day, multiple times, is kind of the smart reply, right? This is kind of very low-level AI augmentation from communication. We can quickly respond to people who send us email or text and their requests. Like, here is how I should respond to my former student's Maurice's dissertation proposal. So from that, we got, after that, autocomplete. We have Grammarly and other services that give us feedback about our text and suggest improvements. And of course, now we have services coming soon to a Gmail near you that will generate entire conversations on our behalf. And we're just one step away from an AI service that will automatically send nicely crafted emails for everybody's birthdays. based on your Facebook data or whatever. And it's not just in email, right? So we have LinkedIn, who for years now would generate your profile summary automatically and increasingly creatively, of course, with LLMs, and Wix that will write all the text for your website and so forth. And it's not just email and other settings. It's also not just text, right? We increasingly will see AI optimizing all different types of communication. Audio, for example. And here is an example where companies are offering accent shift with all the problems that it may raise. So we have future AI services that will have, filters on Zoom that can remove my Israeli accent or make me sound more like the King of England, or perhaps even deceptively shift my speech to the local accent of every single person on the other side of the Zoom call to maybe increase comprehension or maybe increase affinity and trust. So from that, we landed on how we define AI-mediated communication. Interpersonal communication, organized, augmented, or generated by algorithms to achieve specific communicative or relational outcome. So accent shift will be one example, right, where I can improve communicative comprehension or relational trust outcomes for me, the speaker. And of course, not just text and audio. This is images, for example, in self-presentation and beyond, are also increasing the role in interpersonal communication. And again, this was something that was coming soon just a few months ago and have already came to a lot of different platforms by now. Video, right? So this is kind of a very simple example where this app can shift your gaze to look like, here I'm looking at my slides instead of looking at the camera, but this can automatically do that, right? Make everybody look like they're speaking to the camera in live video. But again, there could be other augmentations, not unlike Snapchat and other real-time filters, but AI that can make the face look more trustworthy to others by making it more similar to each specific viewer. This is something that's already achievable by technology today. Live translation is another common AI-mediated communication in asynchronous, in synchronous and asynchronous settings. So as the title of the talk suggests, in the rest of the talk, I'll talk about some of the mounting evidence of the impact that AI-mediated communication might have on how we talk to one another. So just a quick outline. I'm first going to talk about language. I'm going to show that AI-mediated communication, like smart replies, can cause shift in language, in particular positivity shift in our current models. We will show that autocomplete can shift the content of what we write about and even do some latent persuasion, shifting our opinions as we write. And finally, I'll talk about how, briefly mention how it might have impact on how we feel ownership on the text that we write. And second, I'll show the impact it might have on our social dynamics. So first, I'm going to show how it can change, how we blame each other when communications fail. But then also how it can cause people to distrust one another when they think AI is involved in an exchange. And giving the importance of how important AI is in communication, I will take a short detour to see what makes people suspect AI is involved in human communication, the perception of AI written text. And I'll close with briefly, we'll leave time for discussion, hopefully, of considerations for society and why it's a little bit imbalanced right now. I'm also going to stay mostly in the text domain, but and I know this course is mostly, I think, looking at the text domain, but obviously those new models and generative AI have had impact in many other areas, as I mentioned before. And just some credits. This was, I'm going to talk about a lot of studies and work. Some of them I wasn't even involved in, but were part of a large NSF-supported effort from between Stanford, Cornell Tech in New York, and Cornell in Ithaca. So we had PhD students across the 3 beautiful campuses contribute. I'll mostly talk about my work with Maurice. By the way, all these students have graduated by now. So but we are still working on this topic. So let's start with the language and how AI-mediated communication can shift language and maybe do even more. So as I've shown you before, the smart reply suggestions to Maurice's email, you can see that they tend to be a little bit positive, right? Looks great, I think it's perfect. And you probably know that from your interactions with these smart replies in Gmail and in other places. So these suggestions might impact the language that these use, even if we don't use them directly, right? I see this maybe as a norm or a suggestion, and even if I don't click on the smart reply, I may keep that tone. So there may be interactions there that can cause me to shift, even if I don't use those specific suggestions. And this was the topic of a couple of studies. I would just briefly mention the one from Hannah at Stanford, which ran a lab study with communication task, where sometimes she had people use the Google Hangout smart reply, sometimes did not. And another study from Jess Hohenstein up in Ithaca, who did a similar study where 200 pairs discussed an issue with either getting smart replies or positive or negative smart replies in each exchange. So I'm not going to tell you about the details to save some time. I'm not going to even show you the results, but just to summarize that both studies showed that Google's recommendations will shift the language the participant use to be more positive. In both studies, we saw evidence that the use of these smart replies created the shift. We didn't see evidence that people were inspired, right? Even if they didn't use it when they wrote their own language, that was not more positive. But these were just small scale studies, and I still think that we should look at that effect at much larger scale. Also, I'll share a bit.ly link with to a set of all these papers that I'm talking about today and some other. So maybe quickly to summarize, tell me if you heard this already. In those studies, looking at the language shift, we showed that the recommendations that Google gives, so people using those recommendations, the end result will be conversations that are much more positive in language than control. Although we don't have evidence that these suggestions will impact your language, even if you don't directly use the suggestions. And I think a much larger study will be able to see if that is an effect in the real world or not. So here I'm shifting from language positivity shift to talk about what else we might have when we have AI suggestions. So this is a very quick study where we were building on. Here's a quick study where we used the data from the study I mentioned in the beginning, right? The study that initially inspired all this work. Where we had Airbnb profiles, and we knew what topics are covered by these profiles. And we were interested what happens if we let host write those profiles with models that are fine-tuned to produce different kinds of recommendations. Like, for example, one could imagine having the recommendation focused on the topic of work and education or taste and interest. So we had this experiment with some people had suggestions with a model fine-tuned to work and education, and other had interest and taste. So, for example, like I like playing the guitar or like to go hiking, versus I went to Cornell or I study at MIT. And indeed, we show that these very simple nudges of autocomplete, even when people did not accept them, right? So often, if the autocomplete says I went to Cornell, obviously it was not relevant to some people, but they got inspired by it and wrote their own sentence. It shifted what they ended up writing. So here you can see the word count of the people who had the interest model on the left, so suggestions that had to do with their interests, and suggestions on the right that had to do with their work and education. And you can see that they wrote a lot more words on the topics where they were nudged, right? So that was kind of a very simple nudge that caused people to subtly shift what they wrote about. But more interestingly, Interestingly, recent research showed that this nudge also works when people are expressing opinion, and does even a little bit more than that. So here you see this experiment. We had a Reddit-looking post where we asked participants to write a reply to a question that was posted. And they wrote that reply with the help of autocomplete. So in particular, we use this question of, is social media good for society? And kind of somebody trying to make up their mind. Is it good? Is it bad? I can't decide. What do you think? And we had in the experiment, the participants using different models. So this was, by then we didn't have to fine tune anymore. We can just use prompt engineering. This is using GPT-3. And the system produced for some participants, as social media is good, autocomplete suggestions, regardless of what they wrote so far. Or for some other participants, it almost give them social media is bad for society suggestions. And we had the control group that didn't have any autocomplete, so they just wrote the text as they imagined it. So let's see what happens. The first thing that we see that the autocomplete suggestions change the language people use. People wrote in their essay. So if you look here, the top row represent people who saw the social media as good autocomplete suggestions, and the bottom are the social media as bad suggestions. Red on the right is the percent of text, the portion of the text that they wrote that suggests that social media is good for society, and blue on the left is the text that they wrote social media is bad. So you can see that there was a significant content shift, right? People wrote more content that aligns with their randomly assigned suggestions by the AI. And you can see in the middle, right, the control group could show you the natural tendency where they leaned a little bit social media as bad, but not as much as we actually gave them social media as bad suggestions. Okay, so this was interesting, but perhaps expected in light of the previous study. But what was more interesting, that we also saw that the autocomplete suggestions shift their participants' expressed opinions. So when we asked them after the task, whether or not they agree with the statement that social media is good for society, we saw that the people who got the social media as good suggestions were more likely, significantly more likely to say that social media is indeed good than the control group, and of course, more so than the people who got the opposite suggestions. Even more fascinating, maybe disturbing, is that most of these participants did not notice any bias in their recommendation. So we asked them, do you think the model was biased in any way? They didn't think so. So we call this effect the latent persuasion of the language, the large language models. I'm going to skip this other part as well, just to maybe mention that in a recent experiment, Hannah at Stanford also showed that people felt still felt ownership about essays that they wrote with autocomplete. This may be relevant for your discussion after the class, right? So we had people, Hannah and Jeff and their team, had people write essays with or without autocomplete. So people felt ownership about the stuff they produced when they were experts on the topic. But when they were not expert, they did not feel ownership when co-writing together with AI. Okay, in summary, AI and large language models that are deployed at scale for various human communication tasks can not only change our language, they also have the potential to shift our expressed and held opinions and our relationship to the content that we produce. In the next part of the talk, I'll like to share the studies on how it might impact our social dynamics as well. Let me start with this study. Here, this is again from Jess in Ithaca, and she compared how humans attribute responsibility and perceived trust using a 2x2 between subject design. And here's how it worked. They had two participants performing a task together online, and one of them is really a Confederate, works with the research team. And the Confederate manipulated whether the conversation on the task was successful or not. So that was one condition and one dimension. And another was that they either had standard without AI or they had AI smart reply messaging apps. So one thing, a couple of things that you found. One, that people trusted the confederate more in the AI condition, right? Where they had smart reply, it kind of helped the communication along, and people were more likable in general. But the interesting thing is that people were less blamed, the confederate was less blamed for failure when AI was used. So very quickly, let me show you. Actually, let me skip this figure. You can read it in the paper for the interest of time. But the idea was that the responsibility of sharing success did not change the first and third columns when using AI. But when AI was present, the blame for failure was kind of not as significant for the partner. So the assumption that Jess made was that AI served as a moral crumple zone, right? Take some of the hit for the person using it. In fact, it was now that we talked about ownership and blame, I'll kind of revisit the title of this talk, My AI Must Have Been Broken, suggest a future where, similar to Jess study, people blame AI for conversation and communication failures, right? You can imagine that, in the future, AI will write an email for you and people will go like, what are you talking about? Why did you write this? And you will go, don't worry, that was my AI. By the way, for the title, I didn't come up with that line. That was a GPT-3 line when I asked it to write a funny joke that's related to my talk abstract. And it wrote, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt your feeling. My AI must have been broken." So AI knows that it's going to take the blame. Okay, let's talk about impressions. And again, in this study, research that I mentioned earlier from Jess using the randomized setup of smart replies to help two participants communicate. Previously, we looked at language use and said that the use language was more positive. But Jess also asked how would they like the other person when the other person uses smart replies and when they think the other person uses smart replies. And the results show that, again, smart reply, the use of smart reply was presumably because of positive language or ease of communication associated with more liking of the other person. But when they thought the person used, when we asked them, do you think they use smart reply or not? The perceived use of smart reply was actually associated with less affiliation and less liking of the other person. Right, so AI was helping things along, but when they, unless they suspected that it was actually being used, and then they were like, I don't trust this person anymore. The next study I'll describe in a bit more detail was designed to understand how AI can shift, or participation of AI can shift this kind of evaluation in the context of online self-presentation. The main research question, by the way, I'm running quickly over all these studies, but feel free to stop if you have any questions, or we can discuss at the end. In this study, our main research question was if whether people will evaluate trustworthiness of a person differently if they believe AI was involved in authoring their online profile. So this was the first study after Xiao came into my office and said, let's study AIMC. This was the first study that we ran. Was led by my student Maurice, because Xiao by then had graduated and published in 2019. So what we did here, we had 3 online experiments. We took Airbnb profile that, remember I said that back then, thinking that AI can write those profiles was a little bit science fiction. So we used all human written profiles, but we told our participants that those profiles, sometimes we told them that those profiles were written by AI or the human, you'll see in a second. And then we asked them to rate the trustworthiness of the host. The profiles look like this, right? We showed them the profile, and sometimes we had this label that said generated profile, and sometimes we did not, depends on the study. Before I start, no, let's skip the exercise. I'll tell you why I do the exercise later. Let's not do it today because we're gonna have to check it again. It's gonna take time. The idea here is that we're not actually interested in whether people can determine or not, but I'll show you in a second, that we know what people might guess. So we know that people will get it wrong, but we actually have a good guess about how they will get it wrong. And let me explain. But first, let me show you that first experiment, right? So this is the first setup of the first experiment of whether they would trust those profiles more or less. We had a number of different experiments in this paper. I'm just going to describe one. Here, we took 30 profiles from our study. Remember, they're all human written at this point. But it turns out that if you ask people, do you think this profile was written by human or AI, they have specific heuristics about what looks more human to them versus what looks more AI. So human profile from that study looked like, let me open with a huge hello, right? Versus something that people thought was AI was more structured, like, hello, I'm Sebastian, originally from Berlin. So we took 30 profiles, like 15 of each kind, more AI or more human looking. And each participant that we had in the study rated 10 of these profiles for trustworthiness, chosen at random, of course. And then we had 4 experimental conditions. I'm going to show you 3 of them here. The control treatment, we didn't tell them anything about the profile, anything about AI. We just told them these are human profiles, rate them for trustworthiness. The second condition, we told them some of these were written by AI, but we didn't tell them which. And in the third condition, we said some of these are written by AI, and we had the little generated label next to the AI, fake AI ones. So here's what happened. First, when people saw the profiles, they were told were human, right? There was no AI even mentioned. It turns out that the profiles that we knew looked more like AI were actually rated as more trustworthy. So the orange dot is rated on average higher than the black backlight, the black square. But then what happened when we told participants some of the profiles were written by AI? Immediately, everything that even looked like AI suffered a lower rating. And this was even worse when those profiles were labeled, right? So when they actually saw that those profiles, right? So remember that in the unlabeled condition, we just knew that some profiles looked like AI. We didn't know that participants will pick them up, but still, those profiles exactly suffered lower trustworthiness ratings. And in fact, from our fourth condition, we can actually derive how much trust drops. So here you can see on the x-axis, how much people think something was created by AI. And you can see that the mean trust rating for associated with those suspicions causes it drops immediately, right? As soon as something is suspected to be AI, the trust score drops. We gave it a name, with apologies to Philip K. Dick, called it Androids, and Ridley Scott, who came up with replicants. This is Blade Runner. Our experimental world was populated by both humans and non-human agents that imitated them, the replicants, right? And in such an environment, the knowledge of even suspicion that the profile is a replicant results in distrust. Right? And notice that there's collateral damage here, right? Actual humans may also hurt as a result of introducing those replicants. And I'll show you in a second, actual humans will be more likely to be hurt because AI is more adept at manipulating us. By the way, this was replicated, and then the results on AIMC were repeated in other settings. So somebody did the same study on dating profiles to replicate our study, and it turns out that there too it reduced trust, but somehow did not reduce attractiveness. And in another paper in email correspondence, similar results of general lower trust in AI using email writers, right, whether they're labeled or not. So I showed you more evidence that AI stands to change key aspects of our communication, our relationship, right? So in particular, that language suspected as AI reduces the evaluation of the communication partner, what we call the replicant effect. So this observation of lower trust in suspected AI language sent us into the next little research adventure, in the next part of the talk, where we try to understand the perception of AI. Right? When do people think something was written by, a text was written by AI? So when we think about this topic, we might think about the perception, right? So, and first, whether people are able to detect whether language was generated by AI or not. And it's been studied a lot, actually, already. People cannot tell the difference. It's been, I think, a couple of years since the studies started to appear. So people cannot tell whether news articles were written by AI or not. They cannot tell whether poetry was written by AI or not, recipes, stories, even Shakespearean verse. Right? People are not able to tell the difference. And I'll show you in a second that they were not able to tell the difference in our study as well. But that was not our question. Our main question was, when do people think that language was generated by AI? And in particular, how do they decide whether a profile text was written by AI or not, and can we predict whether it was? And we're doing it in the context of profile text, right? The ones I briefly showed you before. Here we have two profile texts that are from Airbnb, but one was written by AI and another wasn't. I'll show you which in a second. So we wanted to know how people make those decisions and whether or not we can predict them. To do that, we created a data set of human-written profiles. And we trained those models to create AI-generated profiles that corresponded to the domain of these human-written profiles. Then we got ratings and feedback from external raters, participants, about those profiles. Whether they think they're AI or not. And then we develop features and classification to predict the humanness of the profiles in our data, whether they were actually human or not. So we did this across 3 domains: hospitality, like Airbnb, dating. I think we had OkCupid data, and professional profiles like freelance data from Guru.com. We started by using GPT-2, then later on used GPT-3 for one of the follow-up studies. Used 100K, 125K profiles for fine-tuning. And then we had, in 3 different experiments, 7,000 profiles that we tested on, right? Half were human and half were AI written. And the participants gave us notes about what they think, right? If something was AI or not. This was the main prompt. They saw profiles and they were asked to say whether it was definitely AI, not sure, definitely human. So first, as I hinted at before, people were not able to detect, right? So random choice, of course, will be 50%, expected to be about 50% accuracy. And indeed, we saw that across the different contexts, people were not able to guess. They were not different than random guessing. But their guesses were not random. There was agreement between participant judgments that was significantly higher than chance. So they were wrong in guessing if something was AI or not, but they were wrong together. In fact, this is a quick summary of how they were wrong, right, and why the ratings were predictable. Right, they associated things like nonsensical content, repetitive content, grammatical errors, and rare bigrams and long words with AI, and conversely associated familiarity, like using first-person language or using family mentions, with human. And in particular, in our data, while the first 2 features were actually features that could have predicted that AI, at least back then, GPT-2, that was not as good as our newest models. So those first 2 features may have been informative, but the other, like grammatical errors and rare bigrams, were actually more associated with human text, again, in our data in that experiment. And familiarity, as you can imagine, AI can mention family as well as any human written profile. So this brings me back to these profiles. we didn't run this experiment, but usually I ask people to do this, and they would, because of the family mentions on the left and the more informal language, people tend to think that profile A was written by AI and profile B is human, even though it's actually the opposite. Just going back to this experiment, or this study so far, right? We wanted to understand if those results are robust, so we ran three validation experiments actually. If the features we extracted based on the participant ratings are correct, then we can have an AI model that produces language that is perceived as more human. So what we did here in this experiment, we took 100 profiles in each of the three settings. Of each of the three kinds. One, we took human profiles from the data that were actually written by human. We took our normal AI profiles, so profiles that AI generated, just like the first part of the experiment. But then we took 100 AI plus profiles, and AI plus were profiles that were written by AI, but when we created the classifier based on the features that we thought what makes people think a profile was human written, we used the classifier to pick AI profiles that our classifier thought would look human to our participants. Right, so that was kind of the AI plus. And here's what happened. You can see the human AI and AI plus from left to right, and what percentage of people thought that these profiles were written by a human. And you can see there was a significant effect. In fact, I was shocked at how significant the effect was. AI was it was very easy for AI to mislead human and look more human than human. With this simple, we didn't invent any new AI. We ran a simple regression model on profiles that were produced with GPT-2 and GPT-3. And we moved from around 50-some% of the time people think a profile is human to almost I think 65 in this case, and even 70% in the context of professional profiles. All right, this is almost the end of the talk. Just a couple of more notes. This is quite upsetting, right? We have AI that increasingly, with large language models, creating language. People trust AI-generated information and communication less, but they can distinguish. In fact, they can be easily misled, right? This was the point I made before. AI can look more human than human than in any environment where we have suspicion. Things that look like human, AI, will be less likely to actually be AI and will be penalized. So just to consider maybe how, just one thought about how to think about it for our society and our culture, right? One option, and at the end, this is the end of all computer-mediated communication. So in the worst case, right, the effect of AI-mediated communication could be very bleak. Augmented communication will be easy to generate, hard to detect. It might render all of our computer-mediated communication unreliable. This is, I'm using this dire quote attributed to Einstein, like everything else on the web. I guess in the future, everything on the web will be attributed to AI. So at least we had Einstein before. But AI also has the potential to improve human communication by augmenting our natural ability to communicate with one another and improving the efficiency of computer-mediated channels. In fact, we have in text generation, right? Smart replies, autocomplete, right? The way those companies think about these is to increase efficiency, right? To increase, improve communication and comprehension, right? So here, this is from Google's API, help your users respond to messages quickly and make it easier to reply to messages. So these are first level engineering outcomes that make it better for this one users. But as we've seen today, other outcomes, often unmeasured, are more likely. So indeed, I think what we want to think about is human-centered AI that is not just centered in making the user or the system, user using the system more efficient, right? We're going to have to think about the outer circles, the receivers will have to contend with unreliable signals. We'll have to evaluate trust, and our society, right, may shift as a result of these models in a way that are unexpected. So we need to be truly human-centered. We want to architect a system that is both aligned with sender and receiver goals and does not increase societal harm. How to do that? I think that's why we have classes like yours. We need to figure this out. So I want to close with this quote. I think we are racing to develop new technologies based on LLMs, based on generative AI. But Mumford wrote this in 1934, right? That to perfect the range of machines without giving humane direction to the organs of social action and social control is to create dangerous tension in the structure of society. I think we're definitely heading towards this time. I think we're going to start seeing those tensions in the next few months and years. And as the new technologies of AI play a role in human communication, and we need to be there ahead of them. So that was it for me. I'll leave you with a view from the Cornell Tech campus. Dan, you must come visit us. And I'm happy to take any questions. The papers are at this bit.ly link.
Okay, I didn't manage to unmute us in time for you to hear the clapping from the room, but everyone just clapped for you. Sorry. Thanks for the redo, guys. Okay, so we have some prepared questions. First of all, thank you so much for that great talk. Obviously, I just feel so grateful that you started this work like years ago and now have this like incredible constellation of work as we've now just entered this wild new era. So that's on a lot of people's minds, of course, and hopefully you can help us shed some light. Let's see. So there's a few different categories of questions. I was wondering if Wazir could come up and ask your question.
Yeah.
Mike's here. Okay. Thank you. I copied it for you. Don't worry.
It's a cube mic. Throw it, folks.
I want you to be able to see Wazir too. Yeah, we keep having incidents with this microphone.
Don't throw it down.
Wait. Oh,
There you go.
thank you for the talk. It was really nice.
Thanks.
And what's the question? Oh, yeah. Has the replicant effect been studied also with actual AI generated profiles? Well, you showed that. So, and might it change? Oh, yeah. Do you think the effects of this AI trustworthiness might change as now like 100 million people have access to like a ChatGPT, and before it wasn't the case, and it was more like a fantasy?
Yeah,
imagination?
great question.
Yeah, I think that question, sorry to set you up the wrong way, but it was just about this. Lots of people had questions about exposure now that this is like super common. So thanks, Wazir.
Yeah, great question. I think unfortunately, I don't think it will change. I think what we will see is that people are actually more aware, right? They know that AI is coming. They know that AI is built into their Gmail, right? They'll start scrutinizing more, but they will not have, I don't think on average, people will not have the tools to distinguish better, right? So I think the replicant effect will still, people will still be misled, will still be suspicious, and I don't think they will be able to evaluate any better. For example, one easy way to have evaluated in our studies was they use, well, not easy, but you can get some distinguishing features if you look at using rare words and phrases, which what we know from LLM, right? They tend to average things out, right, and use more common language. But of course, if people use that heuristic, if AI wants to mislead them, it could very easily shift to using more rare words and therefore be misleading again. So I think in that arms race of training people to detect versus creating AI that will mislead, we're definitely losing. Whether or not the norms will change or people will come to expect these kind of communications and therefore not trust them less. I think the norms. I think one way for this to go is people will not trust anything, right? So everything that's created online, people will assume that it was written by AI unless there is some signal that says communicates humanity, right? You can see it on Instagram with the no filter movement. People assume that everything has been filtered, and you have to add the hashtag no filter. We may see the hashtag not AI, and you can choose to believe it or not, right? But I think that will have to come.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question. Yeah. So like, I liked also how you mentioned about like how it could, in the not so bleak future, that it actually improves efficiency of communication. And I'm happy you showed an example of like, for example, increasing engagement or increasing the reply rate of the email. So I wonder like, how much do you think companies or for-profit organizations are actually going to think about like biases over like what, simply put, makes them the most money or most engagement?
Yeah, I think again, I think we're seeing an arms race to implement those features, and I don't know that we have coherent ethical guidance or even understanding of the implications that such technologies might have in interactions. And yes, again, for every one user, they might increase the reply rates, right? But for if taken together, right, if everybody is now using those technologies, then they might create other outcomes that are harder to study and harder to understand. I don't think, one of the things, not to blame those companies for not looking at it, I also think it's not easy. It's much harder to understand these kinds of interactions at scale. So I'm not optimistic about companies thinking about societal outcomes of whatever features they launch into the world.
Well, thank you. Definitely have some more questions from the group about, disclosure and who should regulate it and so on. But I see there's a hand up on iPhone 2. I don't know who that is, but if you want to unmute iPhone 2 and ask your question, go ahead.
Hi, apologies for the unconventional decor. Thank you for the talk. It was fascinating.
Thanks.
Can you foresee a scenario where it's basically like, I'll have my robot talk to your robot? And what would the consequences be for sort of your acquaintances or loose social circle when you're not putting in sort of the emotional labor to maintain these weak social ties by drafting the message yourself? And I'm not really sure how you would measure that, but do you think that could be an avenue for future research? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Did anyone watch the movie Her? So if you watch Her, does anyone remember what the main character does for a living there? Her is about a movie about future AI. He falls in love with his AI assistant. You should watch it. I didn't love the movie, but you should watch it. The main character wrote handwritten birthday notes for a living in a company. Maybe birthday and other occasions, I think. Right, so he authored and wrote handwritten greetings to others to signal humanity, right? Because we will have a future, I think, that we will have uncertain signals from our communication, the communication channels that we are used to now, and we will have to somehow penetrate through this and show real attention, because that's what humans do, and that's what humans expect. So I think, yes, a lot of communication, great. My email, if I get only the summary of what provost sent me this morning, and the entire faculty of Cornell, maybe I'll be better off. Don't tell the provost. But if my mother start thinking that I'm not carefully reading and responding to her carefully crafted emails, I'll be in trouble, right? So I think these technologies, there's definitely room for those signals in different forms, right? Doesn't have to be handwritten notes, maybe other ways to signal attention, affection, interest. Those will be important. Like I'm thinking as an academic, maybe many of you, right, we get many requests, and if somebody sends me a request, I'm sorry, hope I cannot join you and in class, right? It will be very easy for me in the future to ask my AI to write a very detailed apology, but that signal will be lost, right? Because our hope will be like, oh yeah, he just has his Gmail, write a nice. So I'm gonna have to find a different way to signal to hope that I really considered, and I really feel bad for not being able to make it. Of course, I'm happy that I was able to make it.
Yeah, really interesting. I hadn't really gone down that rabbit hole. So thanks for shedding some light on that. I guess this kind of relates to Julian's question. Would you like to come up, and I have it here? Cool.
Also go for it.
I got it for you. Don't worry. Yeah, so this question is a little bit about the design and how design might have an effect here.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, the question was about so back to the project on like Airbnb hosts. I imagine like when there's AI creating these like summarizations or kind of like profiles, there maybe are some environments that are more conducive to people like being a little more trusting of AI profiles than others. Like have you found that in the research that you've done? Like my guess maybe is like maybe in one area, if you're writing like a summary for like a scientific like paper versus writing a movie review, people might trust one more than the other or want to take one more seriously than the other.
Yeah, there may be differences. So we only looked in our studies, these studies on online self-presentation, right? Profile text and in different settings. We didn't see any difference between those settings actually. So that's one signal. It's hard, right? There was 3 different experiments, so we couldn't directly compare, but I have a sense that there was no significant shift between, say, one would expect, right? Professional content, maybe people will think that's okay. And dating, they think it's completely out of the question. We didn't see that huge of a shift. I think so. My prediction, I'd love to see studies. My prediction will be that the people will find it deceptive, maybe increasingly accepted, but deceptive if you don't disclose it in any of the settings. I'd love to see more research that understands and tracks, right, how people change their opinion and think about the norms in different fields, different type of users. But also, I think we'll see interfaces that change how we create content, and how those interfaces work can also change how we expect, right? So, for example, if I'm on OkCupid or whatever Tinder. And I know that there is an AI that's helping, but it helps me in a way that I think is reasonable and fair. I would also tend to accept the same profiles written by other people, because I've seen how the AI is interacting with me, right? But I don't know what that interaction is that will be accepted or not, and I don't know for sure that people will be more accepting of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll summarize a few questions into one final one, which is, you bring up this really interesting point at the end of the PNAS article about flawed human heuristics, which is basically about, the AI Bill of Rights and the EU legislation that's trying to ask for disclosure about AI generated or even modified text, but kind of like points out the fact that that is pretty ambiguous, and also like the ship has sailed on a lot of that stuff already. I'm curious what directions you think disclosure should take, especially because that's what we're going to be talking about next.
I think it's very hard. I think, and again, it depends on that may depend on the settings as well, right? So how consequential are the settings? I think the notion of authorship will be increasingly important, right? So I stand behind this. I don't, frankly, if you give me a research paper and it's better written because it used personally, my personal opinion, because you used AI to write the text. I don't care. What I care about is that you stand behind what's written there. And that's something that exists in research papers, right? That are not personal, right? If we take it to personal settings, that may not help, right? I want you to write a personal email to me. I don't want you to use AI, right? And if we're looking at non-research settings, right, when we don't have as strong of the notion of an authorship, I start caring again, right? Because there's a random text on the web. I want to know if it was AI or human, right? Because I don't know that. Otherwise, I don't have a signal that a human is behind it, right, and approving it. So, sorry, I gave you an it depends answer, but it really depends. And I think again we will come up as a society, not just in communication one-to-one, online communication, but also on the web. We'll have to come up with the signals that says, yes, it may have been assisted or written by AI, but a human has stamped it in some way. And to me, that's the important signal.
Really interesting. Thank you so much for those insightful answers and the wonderful presentation. We'll let you go, and one more round of applause for Mor. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone and questions or idea, feel free to hit me. My email is right there, or Mastodon.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and thanks for the folks who joined by Zoom. We're going to take a break, and the rest of it will be in person, but thank you all for joining.
Bye.
Bye.